Water pump leadership represents a mechanical, efficiency-driven, results-oriented style that views people primarily as resources or machine parts. Rice field leadership, by contrast, sees leadership as an organic, relational, patient process, emphasizing the importance of cultivating the right environment for natural, God-driven growth to occur. Hey, welcome back to the channel. Today I want to explore storytelling in the context of leadership. What if the way we've been leading in our churches, our ministries, and the organizations isn't just inefficient, but actually unbiblical? What if instead of approaching leadership as a mechanical exercise in efficiency and output, we saw leadership as a patient, organic, and relationally rich process? The other day I had a conversation with a friend of mine, Rick Sessoms, author of Leading with Story. He said something during that conversation about leadership that I can't stop thinking about. And I want to explore with you the profound differences between what Rick Sessoms calls water pump leadership and rice field leadership, and discuss how storytelling and the exploration of our own stories and the stories of others are foundational for cultivating deep, spiritually formed leaders. Let's start by clearly painting a picture of two contrasting images. Water pump leadership represents the prevailing leadership style of the church, particularly influenced by Western 20th century organizational structures. It is mechanical, results-driven, and power-oriented. Just picture a water pump. When you pump the handle, water comes out immediately. You apply pressure, and results follow. If results slow down or stop, you simply pump harder and apply more pressure. If a part breaks or stops working efficiently, you replace or tighten it. And under this model of leadership, you can see how leaders can begin viewing people as interchangeable components of a machine driven by pressure, expectations, and external force. It's about measurable outputs, predictable growth, and immediate results. Does that sound similar to what you might have experienced in a church? As water pump leadership has been exported globally through Western Christianity, we can see it manifest in different cultural contexts. For instance, in India, the model often takes on the form of patriarchal structures and gurus, where leaders adopt a top-down authoritative role, much like traditional spiritual teachers who exert significant control over followers. In Africa, it can resemble tribal chiefs, where leaders are expected to wield substantial power and command respect, often making decisions with little input from the community. In Latin America, we often see it reflected as dictators, where church leaders hold unilateral authority and direct control, reinforcing power structures and demanding loyalty. In the West, it appears as the CEO model, where church leaders adopt corporate strategies and hierarchical structures, focusing on efficiency, productivity, and measurable outcomes. In all of these contexts, water pump leadership emphasizes control, pressure, and efficiency rather than relational cultivation or organic spiritual growth. This leadership model has dominated our churches and ministries, particularly in the West, largely influenced by a guy named Frederick Winslow Taylor and his scientific management principles, a system rooted primarily in secular industrial efficiency rather than biblical spiritual principles, where efficiency, productivity, and measurable results reign. In stark contrast, rice field leadership offers a radically different and deeply biblical alternative. Imagine a rice farmer cultivating a rice field. This farmer knows intuitively that growth is not immediate and cannot be forced. The farmer carefully prepares the soil, plants seeds, provides water, ensures adequate sunlight, and patiently waits. The farmer understands that life and growth reside within the seed itself, and his or her role is simply to cultivate conditions that allow this inherent potential to flourish. The rice field is subject to seasons, times of planting, growth, waiting, weeding, and harvesting. Growth is organic, patient, and relationally intentional. This rice field leadership model aligns deeply with biblical leadership principles. Paul's words in 1 Corinthians 3, 6-7 reflect this beautifully. He said, "I planted, Apollos watered, but God gave the growth. So neither he who plants nor he who waters is anything, but only God who gives the growth." This is the heart of rice field leadership, trusting that God is ultimately the one who grows and transforms people, And our role as leaders is to cultivate environments where that growth can occur naturally and relationally. But why is this model essential, and how is storytelling related in any way? The spiritual formation thought leaders like Dallas Willard, Ruth Haley Barton, Henry Nouwen, Richard Foster, and St. Ignatius of Loyola emphasize repeatedly that authentic spiritual transformation is never achieved through external pressure or forced outcomes. Instead, they argue transformation occurs through patient cultivation of the heart, mind, and soul. Dallas Willard, in Renovation of the Heart, emphasizes that spiritual growth happens gradually, deeply, and organically within the human heart. He advocates for intentional formation through spiritual disciplines and relational practices, rejecting any form of mechanical forced spirituality. Richard Foster echoes this sentiment in Celebration of Discipline, highlighting the necessity of slow, patient, habitual practices that position us before God for deep transformation. Similarly, Ruth Haley Barton, in her book Strengthening the Soul of Your Leadership, emphasizes rhythms of rest, solitude, silence, and relational intimacy with God as critical for authentic spiritual and leadership formation. Henry Nouwen famously critiques power-centric authoritarian leadership models in his book In the Name of Jesus, advocating instead for vulnerable, servant-oriented leadership that prioritizes relational authenticity and emotional depth. St. Ignatius, centuries earlier, recognized that spiritual growth isn't a product of mere intellectual assent to doctrine, but arises from deeply imaginative, contemplative engagement with God's story and our own life stories. Ricefield leadership synthesizes these perspectives beautifully. It recognizes that effective spiritual leadership is inherently relational, patient, and organic, centered on cultivating the conditions for deep heart transformation rather than producing immediate measurable outcomes. Central to this cultivation is the practice and art of storytelling. But why storytelling? How does storytelling fit within this relational, patient, organic leadership model? Well, storytelling is perhaps the oldest, most profound tool that humanity possesses for understanding ourselves, others, and God. Humans are inherently narrative creatures. We make sense of life through story. Our beliefs, our identities, our emotional and relational health are all profoundly shaped by the stories we embrace and inhabit. In leadership, storytelling is not merely a technique for persuasion or communication. It is the mechanism through which we experience and express relational truths, spiritual realities, and deep identity formation. Leaders who want to embrace a Ricefield approach must become adept at recognizing and nurturing the stories within themselves and those they lead. When leaders share their own stories faithfully, vulnerably, authentically, and humbly, they model the type of relational environment where deep spiritual transformation can thrive. This aligns with Henry Nouwen's idea of leadership as vulnerability and authenticity. It fosters relational trust and psychological safety, allowing communities to go deeper spiritually, emotionally, and relationally. But storytelling isn't just about leaders telling their stories. It's also about cultivating environments where people are invited and encouraged to explore, understand, and share their own stories. Safe, secure places. When individuals explore their stories, they begin to recognize patterns, identify wounds and strengths, and discover God's persistent presence and more clearly discern their role in His broader redemptive narrative. This process deeply resonates with Ignatian spirituality's emphasis on imaginative, contemplative engagement with God's story. Consider the biblical narratives. Jesus consistently employed storytelling to cultivate spiritual transformation in His disciples. He taught almost exclusively through parables, short, powerful stories intended to invite listeners into deeper reflection and heart-level change. He said, "For those who have ears to hear." Jesus' leadership style was never mechanical or forced. It was always organic, patient, relational, and deeply narrative-driven. Take, for example, one of my favorite stories exemplifying God's desire to know us and the depths of our hearts, the woman at the well in John 4. Rather than directly confronting her with theological truths, Jesus engages her relationally, listens to her story, shares aspects of His own, and gently invites her into a larger, more transformative story of redemption and restoration. He cultivates a relational environment, rich with narrative and vulnerability, where genuine spiritual transformation occurs organically, not through coercion or pressure. Similarly, consider the Apostle Paul's letters. Often read as purely doctrinal, Paul's teachings emerge profoundly from his own lived experience. His narrative-driven theology, filled with personal stories of struggle, pain, joy, and transformation, reveals a leadership style rooted deeply in relational and organic authenticity. To summarize these two leadership images again clearly, water pump leadership represents a mechanical, efficiency-driven, results-oriented style that views people primarily as resources or machine parts. Rice field leadership, by contrast, sees leadership as an organic, relational, patient process, emphasizing the importance of cultivating the right environment for natural, God-driven growth to occur. Ultimately, embracing rice field leadership and storytelling invites us into deeper spiritual maturity and relational authenticity. It positions us not as controllers or manipulators of outcomes, but as patient, nurturing cultivators of spiritual growth. As leaders, my prayer is that we courageously step into this model, trusting that God, who began a good work, will indeed carry it to completion in His time and by His grace. Thanks for listening.